Tiffany, here is my first question for you. When you hear the words self-reliance, what does that mean to you?
Ah, that is a really good question. Self-reliance. I guess that for me, it means having faith in yourself, that you are able to do what's best for you. I know that I consider myself to have been self-reliant for pretty much my entire life, having been sent away to boarding school at quite a young age. And it's a question of having faith that you know what's right for you and being able then also to take responsibility for the decisions that you made.
So my question to that, because now we've discovered that we both originally from the African continent.
Yeah.
How would you say living in Africa lends to being self-reliant? Because I get the sense, and typically what I've experienced is most of us that come from that part of the world, we learn to be self-reliant really early on.
Yes, is the short answer to that. I think that when you have any experience in Africa, Africa doesn't work the same way as Europe does. I can't speak for America or the Far East because I have no experience there, but for sure, Africa is special. Africa is fabulous and spectacular and frustrating and testing and all these amazing things in one go. And yeah, it does teach you how to think outside of the box, how to make things work in maybe not a way that you would necessarily expect. And I know that it's definitely made me more flexible, maybe more ingenious. Ingenious, maybe a fancy word, but being able to think outside of the box is definitely one of the things that I do well as a result, I think, of living in Africa.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there's that saying from South Africa. It's an Afrikaans saying, "A boer maak 'n plan." A farmer makes a plan. And that was my experience, right? It's like you just, exactly as you said, you think outside the box, you find a solution that may not be immediately evident, but you always figure out a way to get to where you need to get to. So that's definitely an African positive character trait that I tend to find with people like ourselves who have come from that part of the world.
Yeah, and just to add that I think that we're very good also at looking at a situation and very quickly being able to see what could possibly go wrong. Not just one thing, but like a variety of different potential obstacles, and being able to come up with a solution for that. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll probably even say it like a little bit less eloquently. We definitely have the ability to spot bullshit.
Exactly. And I mean, there's two, you said the Afrikaans saying, there's two sayings that come to mind that were bandied around a lot when I was growing up. One was that Murphy was born in Africa, and the other one is that man plans and God laughs, especially in Africa. So yeah, it's I think we're very down to earth. I think we're very straightforward. And that's something that my clients appreciate, is the fact that I press them when they need to be pressed. I'm not somebody who's going to be fluffy and allow you to just sort of wander all over the place because it makes you feel good. So I think we are straightforward.
Yeah, no, I love that, because I would say the same thing. I mean, what I'm most known for outside of the podcast and, my academic background is, for the longest time, I've been teaching martial arts, and I've had the great honor of traveling all over the world teaching. And I definitely think that most people, when they describe me, will say that, right, Rodney is a straight shooter, to the point, no messing around, no flowery stuff, just say it as it is, right? And that, again, it comes back to all these things that we're talking about.
Exactly. People know where they stand with me. So yeah.
I like that. So that's actually a really good segue into what I want to talk to you about: communication. And the reason I want to talk about communication is because I think there's a lack of it. I think it's definitely a lost art in the 21st century. I'd love to get your take on why you think that is the case, or even if you even agree with me.
Oh, no, I absolutely agree with you. And the reason why I love communication is becoming more and more I'm becoming rather more and more passionate about it, is that we're never taught how to communicate. I mean, even our generation, we're not taught how to communicate. It's like when you ask somebody, do you communicate? They all go, yeah. Yeah, yeah. And then you say, no, actually, you talk, you speak, but do you communicate? Do you actually get across what it is that, is in your mind? Because people very often don't realize that you can only be sure of what you're saying, not what the other person is hearing. And I think that today you're absolutely right. I think communication, I get really nervous around emoticons and emojis because different things have got different meanings. And I actually sometimes have to check them just before I start using them to make sure that it's not a random, connotation there. So I think the art of communication has definitely been lost. And I think that it's communication happens all through the day, with our spouses, with our partners, with our children, with our neighbors, with our work, colleagues. And there's certain words that when you use them, you're setting yourself up for disaster, for example. And just knowing how to communicate what it is that you want to say in a way that the other person is going to hear what it is that you want to say. So, yeah.
So digging deeper into that, this is what I've noticed just in my own professional life, is that you can have a relationship with somebody. And when I say a relationship, obviously relationships in the modern world have changed. And what I mean by that is not necessarily a one-to-one relationship where I see somebody every single day. Let's take an example where it's a professional relationship. Yes, I've seen this person, several times throughout our relationship, maybe one-to-one, but most of our relationship now is done via distance, right? So we either through WhatsApp, something like Zoom and so forth. What I find is that, people will make decisions. They'll say, I don't want to do X anymore, and then just sever a relationship with you. But it literally comes out of left field. Like it comes out, in my opinion, it comes out of the blue. Like nowhere along the line of leading up to this decision that they've made, at any point in time, have they, for example, sent me a message, called me up and said, hey, Rodney, listen, I'm a little bit concerned about this, or I'm not happy with the way this is going. Can we talk about it? Can we explore it? Can we find a solution? Basically, I'm unhappy. Can we find a way to work through this? It just literally is silence. You think everything's okay, and then suddenly, bam, you get a WhatsApp. This is how people do it these days. A WhatsApp or an email bowing out, oftentimes with reasons that are not really real reasons. And I keep thinking to myself, almost without exception, every single one of these situations could have been solved and resolved had the person actually reached out to me, or it could be for anybody for that matter, and actually had a conversation. And I keep asking myself, why is this? And it's not just people in our generation doing this. It's people that are younger than us as well, millennials and so forth. It's across the board. So what has actually happened? Like, I'm trying to figure it out for myself, and I can't figure it out. Like, what is that? Because every time I have a problem with somebody, I go and just have a discussion with them. And I know sometimes, of course, there can be lots of variables, right? It's uncomfortable. You don't want to necessarily have that conversation, but what's actually going on? I mean, have you got any insight? Have you noticed this as well?
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm smiling here to myself because, you're saying that, it can be uncomfortable, it's unknown. And I think people are scared of having that conversation. I know that, in my life, I spent many years avoiding a conversation with my children. Their father died 10 years ago now, and I avoided that conversation for years because it was uncomfortable and because I didn't know what was going to be said. But actually, worse than that, I interpreted and I assumed what their reaction was going to be. And I think that's what people do. They get into their head and they're like, oh, but if I call up Dr. King, he's going to say this and he's going to say that, and then I'm going to say this and I'm going to say that. And by the time they finish, they're like, well, forget about it. I'm not doing that. I'm just going to send them an email and tell them to, bugger off. Yeah. And I think that's the problem. There's a lot of interpretation. This is why it's like, people are scared of communication. And today it's so easy. Send a WhatsApp, with a little emoticon. My son was is applying for he's applying for scholarships in the States. He wants to go on a football scholarship, soccer scholarship, and he applied to one, and for various reasons, he was not interested. But it was more because of them than because of him. So I wrote an email asking for the application fee to come back, and I get this very sort of nondescript thing going, oh, and yes, right at the end, by the way, the application fee is non-refundable. Thanks for asking. And I just went, that incensed me. Thanks for asking. I'm not asking, it's not like, would you like to come and have a pizza with me? No. So I think it's people don't understand the power of words, and people also assume that they know what you're going to say. And as a result of that, avoid the conversation completely.
So within that, what I would probably say as well is that people have become very siloed. They're very much insular within their world and how they perceive the world. And what they also don't want is they don't want to be challenged. And I think part of people not wanting to have that conversation is they don't want to have the conversation that in actual fact, they may be the problem, that they may be incorrect, right? And that's a conversation you don't want to have, because now your ego does everything it possibly can to always make you look like you're in the right, even when you're in the wrong. I mean, if I just think of like, when we have an argument with somebody that we love, right? How difficult it is for one side to acknowledge that they may be the problem and to apologize. And I think this is part of it as well, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, one thing that comes up for me when you're talking about having an argument with someone we love is, at the end of the day, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And I think a lot of the time people choose, it's not that they choose, it's like human nature. We want to be right. And we will fight to be right, even if we think that there might be a possibility that we're wrong. In certain situations, we'll fight to be right. There was something else that came up for me as well, which has completely disappeared. So obviously it wasn't that profound. But it is true that people don't want to be wrong, and they'll avoid that. It's outside of their comfort zone. But I would say that if they have an inkling that they might be wrong and they're avoiding the conversation because of that inkling, then somewhere there is an element of, let's say, shame, guilt, something around there, because they're not having the conversation because they know that maybe they're wrong. So,
yeah, and I guess also added to this, because I think it's all connected, there is a shift towards people not wanting to feel what they feel. That's the sense that I get. There's this kind of, I don't want to feel bad. I don't want to feel guilty. I don't want to feel that I'm in the wrong. And so rather than dealing with that, there is this passing on, right? Okay, well, I'll just make this decision. I'll sever the communication. Then not only is that problem out the way, but I also don't have to now deal with the way that I'm actually feeling and thinking.
It's really interesting because my training is all around energy, the way that people present themselves, the way that they show up. And basically the idea is that there's 7 levels of energy, but generally the world functions within the first 2. And the first 2 levels, level 1 and 2, are what we call catabolic, and they're quite negative levels of energy. They're actually sort of destructive. The first level is the victim level. Oh, woe is me, life happens to me, everything's unfair, everybody else is lucky, blah, blah, blah. I'm never going to succeed because I'm unlucky. It's an I lose mindset. Whereas level 2 is the I am going to win whatever happens. And it's a very aggressive, fear-driven, energetic mindset. And it is a question of, I have to win. I don't care what happens to everybody else. Dog eat dog. If I don't do it for myself, nobody's going to do it for me. And that is where you know what? I'm just going to cut ties, because in any case, the guy's wrong. And it's better for me. And this way, it works out better for me. It's all me. It's like, it's super, super ego-based there. And I think it's a place where a lot of people live. The majority of people actually live there.
I think you've actually hit something that's really important. That level 2, I think that kind of really does answer a lot of what we've been talking about up until now.
Yeah.
The question then is, I'm assuming that there are other levels, right, that are a little bit
Yeah.
more productive. So
The thing is then, yeah.
Sorry, how do we get
on.
there? So the question is like, okay, so how do we shift to that, to the upper levels?
This is the thing. I think first is the first step in any of this is awareness of where you are and how you're showing up. Because a lot of people don't want to actually look at themselves. They don't want to take the blame. You know, they'd rather be right, in fact. So the first level is awareness. You need to be aware of how you're showing up. After that, if you have acceptance, you know, then you can actually start to say, okay, well, this is what I am. This is what I've done. You need to take responsibility for, you know, everything that's happened in your life, because at some stage, you know, it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter how horrible. Somewhere you have your responsibility to bear. It may be very minimal or it may be all of it. But the fact of the matter is we all have responsibility that we need to take for ourselves. And once we've done that, then we can have a better understanding of who we are, understand that we have choice. And I think this is a great thing with coaching, is that it actually gives, well, at least my clients back the idea, or it reinforces the fact that they have choice on everything, the way that they react, respond, show up. Everything is a choice. So once you have that, you can then move up. So level 3, which is kind of positive but can be negative, is that sort of you're looking for cooperation, okay? But level 3 is also the frazzled mum who's going to do everything for everybody, complains that, you know, nobody's helping her. Then when somebody says, can I give you a hand? She's like, no, I'm fine. But then carries on. That's kind of level 3, you know, it's, and then as you move up, you go to, you know, compassion, looking, you know, service, looking for a win-win situation, synergy, working with others. And then you've got level 7, which is absolute joy, which we can't live at because it's so it's a fleeting. But we actually go through these 7 levels, all of us, all through the day, depending on whether we're stressed, not stressed, whether we're tired, whether we're, you know, what's going on, what's influencing us.
I think the idea of self-awareness is something I've spoken about on other episodes with other guests. I think that's super important. The thing is that I notice is just on that, you know, using my kind of example, you know, just dealing with people in a professional setting, is that even though I have said multiple times throughout the relationship, if there's a problem, talk to me. Everything can be resolved with good conversation, good communication, especially if we're coming both from the same place, right? We're saying, okay, this relationship's important and we both want to work it out. But even with saying that, it still doesn't seem to hit the mark. It still doesn't seem to make any difference. So the way that I've tried to approach it now is that I have to be the change that I want to see in the world. And so really what it comes down to is that while I may not be able to change other people in how they are responding to situations and how they're showing up, I definitely can. And I think that is a good place to start and a window into this idea of being self-aware, because it also means that I have to acknowledge that I may not always be easy to talk to. It may not be easy for people just to come up to me and express what they need to express. And how can I recalibrate myself so that that does become easier for people to talk to me?
It's very interesting when you said that, you know, you can't change others. When I started going through the whole life coaching training journey, there's a lot of introspection that is required. I mean, basically, we have to look at everything. We have to question everything. And I mean, the first question that you're asked is, who are you? Which I just thought was a stupid question at the time. I'm like, well, that's just ridiculous. You know, who am I? And in fact, my reaction, I realize now, was because I was embarrassed that I didn't know. Now, after, you know, partway through all of this, I remember having, so it was last year during the last training that I did, and we had a breakout room. And so I was with another coach, and she was like, so what do you want to talk about today? So I'm like, well, I've got this problem with this person. I've done all of this work and I've changed and they're still the same. You know, it's like, what do I do? And she said to me, she said, Tiffany, she said, you cannot change anybody else. and I was just like it was like a wall that hit me. I was suddenly this illuminated. It was like the wall just exploded actually in front of me, and I could see. And I was like, "You're absolutely right. We can't change anyone. We can only change how we, well, hopefully respond to them." And it is a question of, especially with our close relationships, of even with children. People are always trying to change kids. You know, I wish they were like this. I wish they were like that. They are like who they are. And if you can actually just take a breath in a situation that is maybe taxing or stressful or uncomfortable, conversations, a lot of people avoid them because they're worried about having conflict of some description. But if you can just take a breath and say, okay, you know, the person in front of me is the person in front of me, know who they are and actually speak to who they are rather than who you would like them to be, because they're not that person. You know, and I think that's what's really important, is understanding who we're talking to. And I know that my coaching journey has definitely changed the way that I interact with those people closest to me. Yeah. And
so, yeah. No, that's good. I was thinking as you were saying that, you know, I was just reflecting on self-awareness and just your, you know, your story of being asked in the beginning of your coaching journey, who are you? And you were like, oh, that's a ridiculous question. Like, why are you even asking that? Right. So that might also be the thing for a lot of people, is that maybe they're just not self-aware. Maybe they're not spending any amount of time looking inward and actually trying to discover who they are. And then I was thinking, okay, well, if that's the case, like maybe there might be another way to bring this to the light, right? So how can we bring this out? And one way I would think of doing that would be to ask somebody, what do they value? What are their values? Like you were saying, like you need to know who you're speaking to. But let's say I don't know who this person is, at least not deeply. I get the periphery, but I don't really know. It might be pertinent. And of course, you need to, you know, say this in a way that comes across as not arrogant. But the question would be, so what do you actually value? Like, what is important to you? What are your values? Because that to me is a really good starting point into this idea of being self-aware. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. And in fact, one of the things that I realized on the journey that I've done is that for 20 years, my values were completely contorted. And they were contorted for various reasons. But the fact that I actually stopped and looked and said, okay, who am I? It was that question that set me off. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what my values were. I was being, no, you see, okay, I catch myself. I was going to say I was being forced to live against my values, but that's not true because I've taken responsibility for it because I had a choice and I chose to stay. So I know what my values are now, and I feel as if a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. And I also, because of that self-awareness, have the confidence to be able to say, I'm not doing that, or I don't agree, or, you know, that's wrong from my point of view, because it goes against my values. Values are so fundamentally important. But when you ask somebody, what are your values? Very often they don't understand what you're talking about. I mean, my top value is my family. There is nothing that I value more than that. Then there's other values that I have, like integrity, professionalism, all of these things come in. But, you know, when you ask somebody, what do you value? They don't know. And I think it is so important to understand what it is that drives you, what it is that is important to you in every day. What is it that irritates you about somebody? You know, when something, you know, because that's when your values are being compromised, is when that irritation, that frustration comes in because they're late or the email is spelled, you know, got bad spelling, grammar's not correct. What are those things that niggle you when somebody, you know, that's your values being compromised.
Yeah. And there's the other side of this too, right? Tiffany, if you think about, like, again, just the examples that we've been giving, the sense of feeling like there must be something wrong with you when people are not communicating with you. So I've had that. I was like, why are people doing this? Like, why are they showing up in this way? Is there something I'm doing wrong? I must be doing something wrong. And you get down on yourself for a while, right? the way that I reframe that for myself is bringing it back to the conversation about values, is that I know what I value. Mm-hmm. And I have to ask myself that in this relationship, up until this point, at any point in time, did I disavow any of my values? Did I compromise my values? And if I can honestly say that I haven't, then I'm okay with the way things ended up, because I can go to bed at nighttime with a clear conscience and say, actually, I never treated that person in any way, shape, or form that warrants this kind of behavior. And that's a really good thing. But I think also after a while, when people are communicating and they're just not having people come back to them, and there's no communication in return, it can be quite disheartening.
I think it's we can't be friends with everybody. We're not programmed that way. So there is a level of it's not about me. As you said, you look at how you've been acting, you look at how you've conducted yourself, and you've lived in accordance with your values. You've honored yourself, you've respected yourself. If there is a persistent sort of reluctance to communicate with you, well, then I would suggest maybe there's an inflexibility. It's one thing to have your own values, but we also have to accept and honor that other people have their values. And we are all perfect just the way that we are, basically. We're all on the journey, and other people have their values too. And if they're not the same as us, then that's fine. I would say, for me, you can have whatever values you like, as long as you're being true to yourself. I think, the authenticity is what is important there. So, have your values, but also honor other people's values at the same time.
So building off that, I think one of the things that maybe we can talk about is, somebody wanting to communicate, feeling a little bit concerned to do that. Maybe they don't feel confident enough to say what they need to say. How would you suggest they go about that? Like, how would you work with one of your clients then to be more confident and assertive in their communication, but at the same time, without being aggressive or confrontational?
Absolutely. It's a really interesting question, and it depends what the communication is geared around. So, for example, if it is somebody who wants to communicate with their partner or their spouse, what is it that's stopping the communication? What is the block to the communication? So very often it is a question of, well, I asked a question, they said this, but I know that that's not what they mean. So you say, well, what evidence do you have, that that's not what the other person means? Why is it that you're so sure? Well, because, and that generally, that I know that that's not what they mean, that comes from, again, a place of shame or guilt. It's like, I've asked them if we can do this. They said yes, but I know that they don't want to do it. So why do they not want to do it? Well, because I know it's not really their thing, and I feel bad asking them, and they're just big. So the whole thing gets a bit complicated. So, having confidence is like having confidence. Know the words that you're using. For example, don't ever start a conversation with, you know what, you always say this, because I can promise you, you're going to have conflict, or you never, another one, going to have conflict. Don't use but. I love you, but. Okay, the but's just gone out. The I love you's just gone out the window, and whatever comes up after the but. And that's something that really sort of struck me, where in a conversation with my son, he was doing really well at school. I was a bit concerned that he was getting complacent. All right. And I was about to go in and say to him, I am so proud of everything that you're doing, but I'm worried that grades are going to slip next term. And I sat down and I thought, oh, that sounds awful. So I went in and I went, you know what? I'm really proud of what you're doing. And I know that if you keep working like you're working, you're going to rock it next term. And he was like, oh, thanks, Mom. That one word, changing it, was the difference between positive and negative receptance. So it is a question of what you want to say, what you want them to hear, I think, is probably the biggest question. so many misunderstandings. And then, you know, the question about how should I know? How should I know? Ask. If you're not sure, if you feel triggered, ask. Okay, this is what I heard. What did you mean? It's very simple things that can be done in a way that don't trigger conflict, you know, that actually, if you take a deep breath, it's always scary at the beginning because it's change, and change scares everybody. Yes, but they're going to do this, and you don't know what they're going to do. So just try it. I always say to my clients, you don't know, try it. All right. You can sue me if it doesn't work, but it always works.
There's two things that stand out there for me. The one was, I think there is some value in just spending a little bit of time, as you noted, just rehearsing a little bit in your head, especially if it's a difficult conversation, you know, it's around conflict, for example, about how you're going to approach this and what you're going to say. And just think a little bit about the words, as you noted. If I say it this way, it's likely going to create more conflict. Is there a way that I can bring this across in such a way that it doesn't do that, but at least get my point across?
Exactly. And then the other thing is to look at it, you know, especially because conflict is very often a perception that we have. We're assuming that it's going to come to conflict. So one example that I have a client that is in a situation professionally wise where he can either go here or he can go here. One way means a big change for his family, and he was all in his head about what the family was going to say and what his wife was going to say. And so my question to him was, why do you feel that you have to make this decision all by yourself? And he said, well, okay, well, you know, what are the options? I said, well, what are the options? He said, well, you know, I can talk to my wife. So I said, yeah, absolutely. How are you going to talk to your wife? And he was like, well, I guess I could ask for her help. And that very simple thing of saying, you know what, this is what's going on. And because, you know, he was feeling a bit guilty because he was being distracted. He felt as if he was being torn in two. And that simple thing of actually going to his wife, who he loves and trusts, and saying, help me. He said it was amazing. He said, because in my head, it was going to be an argument because she was going to say this and she wanted to stay here and I wanted to do that. None of that happened. Help me.
And I think that's where coaches can be very effective. And the reason to have a coach is that we get so mixed up and brought to our story and our narrative. It's hard to see, you know, the trees for the forest.
Yeah.
And so what you gave as an example there, what it spoke to me of is just giving clarity. And I think this is where coaches can really be effective, is that when you're really struggling with all this kind of internal stuff, when you speak to a coach, a good coach, they can give you clarity in a situation where maybe it might be difficult to find that on your own.
Absolutely. And, you know, what I like to think that, you know, how I help my clients is by giving them the space to explore. So in a situation where you're stressed, the natural physiological reaction, if you like, or mental reaction is to close in, is to not be able to see the forest for the trees, is not to see the options and to think, well, like, you know, I've only got one way that I can go. But by saying, okay, well, this is a safe space. Imagine you could do whatever you like. What would be, you know, your ideal way forward? And I do blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, you know, why is it that you can't do that? And it's just giving them space and giving them some perspective. The other thing is the coach is, you know, if you do A or you do B, I'm not attached to either outcome. Okay, you are the expert of you, not me. And even if I have a similar situation where something has worked for me, you may ask for my advice, but I'll tell you, this worked for me. It doesn't mean it's going to work for anybody else. So I'm not attached to the outcome. Like, for example, friends and family might be, because they always think they know what's best for you. You should do this. You shouldn't do that. I'm there literally to give you the space to ask the questions, to get you to start thinking outside of the box. And, you know, well, what would be, well, there isn't any other way. Well, okay, let's just have a look at that. You know, it's like, why do you feel like that? And it's an amazing it's amazing how somebody's perspective can change literally just by asking a couple of questions. So yeah, clarity is a big thing that you get from coaching.
I latched onto the word there too that you mentioned, explore. And one thing that might be helpful for some people is when you get so caught up in your narrative, as you said, it's very difficult to see options. And one way to explore that might be literally to have a journal and write down all the potential ways to approach this problem with what you think is, going to be either the positive or the negative, but at least explore options. Because it's hard to, especially when you're all worked up and you're stressed out, it's hard to, manifest all different options and attend to them equally because it's all over the place. But I think if you write it out, it's a more productive way of approaching that, because then you can actually separate them out and actually look at them individually.
It's a very interesting idea that you've come up with there, because it actually touches on a couple of different things. First of all, journaling, getting the white noise out of your head and onto paper. And at the beginning, I always say to my clients, don't think about it. Even if it's random words that don't make any sense, just get it out. The other thing is that the stress and anxiety that we feel 90% of the time comes from the fact that we're thinking about something that hasn't happened. It's something in the future. We're living in the future, and that's where stress and anxiety reside. Fabulous. Let's wallow in that. When we're stuck with the thoughts, the anxiety rises. As soon as we take action, our brains feel more in control. We feel more in control. So the very act that we are writing in a journal is taking action. So we will inevitably just be able to calm down literally just by doing something, rather than thinking about what we should do and, coming up with all the reasons why we can't do it, why it's not going to work, there's no point, blah, blah, blah. And then all goes horribly wrong.
Yeah, and for those people that may not work for, the other way, and which I found is very effective, is through being more present. And that was actually the focus of my doctorate. I researched mindfulness, and it was specifically geared towards how important being present, is to leaders and how it can enhance their performance. So I can tell a quick, interesting story there. Is I taught a group of leaders from different industries how to be more present. I took them through a really cool, novel experience. And then the goal was for them to go into the workplace the next week, practice those tools to be more mindful, to be more present. And then the following weekend, I had interviews with them and we discussed, well, what was the outcome? And the main focus there was exactly what you noted, was that we spend so much of our time in the future, but we also spend so much of our time in the past, like what went wrong, right? And so what happens if you're able to just be present in the moment as much as you possibly can without judging the experience that you're having? And as we been talking about communication, you're sitting with somebody. A lot of the times what people do is they start projecting what the answer is going to be or what they should say. If this person says this, then I'm going to say that. So these are all the things about past and future colliding. And if you can just be present in that moment and allow yourself just to be fully with the person in front of you as they're talking without judgment, what is the outcome? And I found some really interesting things that happened for these leaders. One of them specifically, as I remember from my research, was saying that by the end of the week, because he had been so present throughout that week, by the end of the week, he literally had to lock his door just to get a break because everybody was coming to talk to him. And this comes back to what you were saying about energy, is that everybody suddenly picked up on the fact that the energy had changed around this person. And they were able to come in and actually talk to this person. And he said, some people who came in hadn't talked to him in ages.
Yeah, I'm sure there's so much that comes up. What you're saying is just so it's so relevant, because we do spend most of our time in the past or in the future. In the past is where shame, guilt, all of that lives there, which is why, the beginning I was saying, to have acceptance, we have to accept ourselves, and we have to accept everything that we've done or that's, happened to us. We have to take our responsibility, because we need to be able to put those bags down, because that is heavy shit there, so we need to leave it behind. The future hasn't happened yet. So we have a certain amount of energy, like physical energy in the day. You can either use it worrying or feeling guilty, or you can actually use it to take action and to make sure that, you know, you're doing whatever you can today to make tomorrow as good as it could be, basically. And there are so many people who, you know, when you're saying in communication, in conversation, the conversation will start with one sentence, and they'll be like, "Oh, yes, that's what we're going to talk about." And the fact that the conversation actually changes, they don't care because they're still stuck on that one thing that they've decided they're going to talk about. So being present is one of the things that. So there's 11 sort of disciplines, and being present is, you know, so important. And in fact, it's, if you want to be 100%, to have 100% energetic engagement and to be able to perform well in everything that you do, presence is the step just before that. You know, and it is truly irritating when you're talking to somebody and they're looking over your shoulder because maybe something more interesting is happening, or, you know, somebody's on their, you know, watching a movie and on their phone. Just like, oh, you know, it's right now is all we have. This moment here with you, you know, is literally all I have, because when it's finished, who knows what's going to happen? I don't know.
Yeah, and the other thing that came out of my research, which, you know, both of us being parents, was the realization of how when they thought they were with their children, they weren't really with their children. Yeah. And that was a big change too. So again, being present is not just only communication, improving communication skills for their leadership, you know, experience in work, but also in everyday life. One other point that I want to just kind of note, because I said there were two things, and then we went off and we talked, which was great. Coming back to that, talking about energy still. One of the lessons I learned in communication, which was very profound, was when I was actually doing my PhD. And the way that I did it initially, one of the things, because it was in the UK and there's different systems, but one of the things that I had to do was an oral examination. But you do an oral examination in the beginning where you defend your research proposal. And because I was so nervous and so stressed out, I didn't realize that I was talking really quickly, like really fast. And you know, after the experience, standing outside, standing with my supervisors, one of my supervisors turned to me and said, "Look, that was great, but if I can give you any advice, when you actually do the real examination, slow down, slow down." I didn't really get what she was saying, to be honest. She's like, "Slow down, you know, have some water on the table." Take a sip of water just so you can take a pause. I was like, okay, I didn't get it. Anyway, once I got to my examination, I took that advice on board, and it was massive. And I've brought that into all of my communication. Just slow down. And when you slow down, not only do you pick up more of what's happening on the other end of that communication, the energy of the person, you know, how they're responding, how they're moving their body and so forth, but you have more time to kind of work through what you want to say, and you come across in a way that is more appealing, or at least I think so. What do you think?
No, I 100% agree. And I mean, the fact slowing down, and it's a normal reaction to when we're nervous to speak fast. But it is true, when you slow things down and take a breath, amazing things happen. And I would add to it the power of silence. You know, how often do people ask you a question, and then because you haven't answered immediately, they're like following up with another question, because it's like, oh, he's not understood what I said. The power of silence, just give people the space to actually think about what you said, and reflect on it, is huge in all kinds of communication. And going back to what you were saying about, you know, leaders with their children, communicating, I think, is something, just being how we are. We need to be, because we are human beings, like that in every facet of our lives. You know, we need to give space and consideration and just slow down with everybody who we interact with, whether it's our 2-year-old kid or a 90-year-old grandmother or somebody at work, you know. And I truly believe that the mark of a good leader is somebody who leads, that's who he is, that's who they are, everywhere.
And it's also okay to say you don't know.
Yeah. Don't be the smartest person in the room, because if you are, you're in the wrong room. That's my belief. You know, it's for me, the whole journey of life is also about growing. You know, it's about learning, about, you know, understanding, and that can only happen when you push yourself a little bit outside of your comfort zone. So be in that room where you have to maybe listen to what others are saying, because you might just learn something, you know.
Yeah, and even when they're
okay.
Yeah, and even when they ask you a question, it's okay to say, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, because that's how you learn.
Yeah, let's figure it out together, right? Let's find a solution together.
Exactly. We started off not knowing anything. We didn't know how to eat. We didn't know how to talk. We didn't know how to walk. So it's fine. Just say, let's learn. I think it's fabulous. You know, but the whole mastery mindset, I think, is one that can take you to amazing places. I really do.